Yeah, it's a lot.
Vita, can you tell her that as soon as she gets up that she can start?
Okay, for real this time. This is it. We're about to start that over the limit. If you did not know already, you are in the city of Emory in the county of Rains, which is the fourth smallest county in Texas. I know many of you have come from outside of Rains County, but I also know that there are many of you from Rains County here as well. Let me introduce myself. I am Lauren Withrow. Lauren Withrow Edgar now. I want you to know that I look super cute when this all started this morning. We have been knocking on doors with Beto to register folks to vote. And I've been to make them a little sweaty in the Texas heat. So I am Lauren Withrow Edgar. I am a United States Marine Corps veteran. I have post-traumatic stress disorder from my time in the Marine Corps. It is now a badge of honor that I do here. Many of you know that almost 3 years ago I attempted suicide, attempted to end my life. Through medical intervention, that did not happen. But there was a human being who reached out to me. He and his team left me voicemails when I was at the VA after I got out of ICU. That man was better with work, and it was a support and a friendship. And I have met so many people through my friendship with Beto. So many of you I've seen in other events. So I'm really proud to be here opening for this event. I do want to say that what we're talking about today is voting rights, whether you're Democratic or Republican. This is an issue that does affect you. You wouldn't be here if you didn't realize that. So thank you so much for showing up, not only for Beto, but for each other. Rains County, again, is the fourth smallest county in the state of Texas. We have gotten accustomed to people not showing up for us, for people not showing up to knock on our doors, for people not showing up. Let me not just say people, let me say elected officials. People who are campaigning for elected positions, not showing up for us. We have been okay, or learned to be okay with being written off. And that's starting to change. And that starts by registering to vote, by showing up to vote, and by understanding what's happening at the local levels, city, county, state level, and of course at the national level. So we have to do what we can to make sure that all of us can vote. It doesn't matter what letters after your name, what color you wear on your hat. This is about being Americans. It's what I wanted to join the Marine Corps to do, what I still believe in, what guides me every day, to know that my neighbors on both sides of the aisle have the opportunity to vote, the ability to vote, and ways to get there, do what they need to do to let their voice be heard. So I want to introduce Rockwell County Chair Erica Ledger.
Hello. Today is a special day for all of us, and I'm here from local county. I'm Erica Ledger. I'm the local county chair, and I'm here in to talk about a person who has a plan for America. And that plan is not here in Texas because our democracy is on the line right now. And bear with me, please. He is a leader who inspired us to fight for democracy and to bring out the better image of ourselves daily. He embodies the process of change in politics and commands us to take civic life seriously because of democracy depends on us. His enthusiasm gives us hope, someone who has always been a leader in a true sense. This person also inspires a generation of young Texans who stand up and fight for what they believe in. His uplifting messages make us think that all things are possible despite the challenges. Yes, the GOP in Texas is showing us the future they want. Republican legislators are supporting 45 big lies. However, we believe, and many of us feel, that the person you are about to hear represents hope and change across our state. This person has a sincere regard for diversity and a solid sense of social justice. This sense of inclusivity follows him everywhere he goes. And I know things in Texas are rough right now. But this leader has pulled us from despair, and he is giving us the ability to pull through and make sure that we register every Texan who is eligible to vote. He has convinced many different non-border Texans to become VDRs and get the job through, because that is all we need. Because it's our duty to act. And you know why? Because Texas is not a red state. Texas is a non-voting state. And he is the change we can believe in. And please, make some noise, Texas, ladies and gentlemen. Texas.
Thank you, Erica. Thank you all. Thank you so much. Please have a seat. That was incredibly sweet. I really, for half a second, thought we should call the meeting to a close at the end of that, because it won't get much better. But thank you for being here. I really, really appreciate it. And it's so nice to be back in Rains County and to have a chance to sit and talk with you all about our country and what's happening right now. Especially after we spent almost all of last year not with one another, not in each other's company, not able to connect eyeball to eyeball, at least without the aid of a screen or a Zoom call, but to be with one another and to feel this heat together. For those of us from El Paso, where I'm from, in the Chihuahuan Desert, up in the Rocky Mountains, When I'm in Emory, it feels like I'm both walking and swimming at the same time through this weather. But it is nice to be here nonetheless. And so grateful to Erica for the kind words and for making the drive over and for her leadership as chair, for Chairman Clayton, our own chair right here in Rains County. Where is Chairman Clayton? Chairman Clayton, I want to thank you for your service as chair and for your service to uniform in this country. We want to thank you. Very grateful to you. Very grateful to you. And to my original friend from Rains County, really before I knew anyone in Emory or Point, I knew Lauren Whitlow. I come here as a candidate for the United States Senate in 2017. And we were at a local restaurant with, I can't remember how many folks turned out, 20 or 30 folks who came out. And then there were the 20 or 30 innocents who were just there having dinner and unsuspecting that a candidate was going to walk in the door, much less a Democrat. But we had a good time. And Lauren asked me some tough questions. She wasn't gonna roll over. She wasn't gonna just let me lay out my spiel and write it down word for word. She was gonna challenge me on some of the things I had said at the meeting, asked me to back it up. Bethel, let's see some proof about what you're talking about. And what are you doing to include Republicans and other voices in the conversation? I want to make sure that everyone is being listened to, is being heard, is included in the conversation. And I thought that was so powerful. And Lauren and I ended up remaining friends thereafter through thick and thin. We were sending pictures to each other of our kids, big news and big moments and big people who've entered our lives. It's really been special. And though Lauren no longer lives in Rains County, she made the drive over from the DFW metro area today and got certified as a volunteer deputy registrar, which allows her to register folks to vote in Rains County. She's the first this year in the county to do that. And then join me on this hot, muggy, soupy day, knocking on doors, and just listen to folks, get to meet them. And we met Republicans, we met Trump supporters, we met folks whose political persuasion we could not discern, but all of them, regardless of the differences, were Texans, they were Americans, they were human beings. And that's the way that Lauren treats people. So Lauren, thank you for being here and for showing us the way. Very grateful to you. I had the chance to meet Ray, who's in the back as I was walking up, served with the 101st Airborne Division, came out to say hello and I guess to hear what I'm going to say, and maybe we'll give him the microphone later if he wants it to hear what he has to say. But there was something that really struck me about what he said 5 minutes ago to me. He said, you know, when I served this country in uniform, I didn't serve, and I'm paraphrasing Ray, so forgive me, but he said, I didn't serve the Democratic Party, I didn't serve the Republican Party, I didn't put my life on the line for a person. I swore an oath to the Constitution. I went out there to defend this democracy and to make other parts of the world safe for democracy while we were at it. That's what we did. And I think about Ray, I think about Lauren and the Marine Corps, I think about each one of you who served our country, willing to put your life on the line, pay that last full measure of devotion for all of us. It's the only reason, frankly, that we're here. Men and women have been doing this in America going back to the 18th century, right through today in 2021. And a little more than a week ago, we remember all of those who lost their lives in service to this country. I went over to the Fort Bliss National Cemetery in El Paso and took my kids there. They're 14, 12, and 10. And last Monday, we went past the gravestones after we listened to the ceremony, paid our respects with everyone who come out. And what struck me, and what I pointed out to my oldest, Ulysses, I said, look at the age on this gravestone. Count how many years from his death to his birth. Dad, he was 19 years old when he died. How about this one over here, guys? My youngest is Henry. Dad, he was 24 years old. And Molly, what about her? It looked like she served during the Persian Gulf War. She was 30 years old. Dad, you're 19 years older than she was. Be 49 this year. 19 years older than she was when she lost her life. And then we had this conversation in the drive back home in the truck. What did they miss out on? that woman who died at the age of 30 in uniform in service to this country. Did she have kids yet? We don't know. If she did, she never really got to see them grow up, or go to the prom, or get married. She didn't get to raise her grandkids. We thought about everyone over the course of this country's history who has done that for all of us and made us the world's proudest democracy. The exception on the face of the planet today. Most of the world tries they might cannot pull this off. This is really hard stuff. In Afghanistan, where we have spent, I don't know how many American lives and how many hundreds of billions of dollars of American treasure trying to prop up a democracy. It's very hard to vote. You take your life in your hands, you may get blown up, you may get killed, depending on your political party or allegiance, that might be the end of things. Pretty much the same story in Iraq. We saw it in South Vietnam. Ray was just telling me back in the 1960s and the early 1970s. The fact that we can do this, not without problems and not perfectly for sure, is pretty close to a miracle insofar as they exist in the politics of our countries across the world. It's also the exception in the course of world history. I mean, you look back over the millennia, you have a brief flourishing of democracy 2,500 years ago in the Greek city-states, and then it's extinguished, unknown to mankind for not hundreds but thousands of years before it pops up again on this continent. And again, imperfectly to begin with, only white men with property could vote at the very beginning, the 1770s and 1780s. It was brought into white men without property. And over time, African Americans, communities of color, the 19th Amendment ensured that women could vote. And in 1965, thanks to John Lewis, thanks to Martin Luther King Jr., thanks to the civil rights marchers and advocates and champions, and those men and women, by the way, who took their lives into their hands. Herbert Lee, who was shot dead by a Mississippi state legislator in 1961 in cold blood with complete impunity as he tried to register black voters in the Deep South. That state legislator never charged. Herbert Lee lost his life for this democracy. The person killed in 1965 on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, right next to John Lewis, who was beaten within an inch of his life. That person who died gave their last full measure of devotion to this country. There's been a lot of blood laid down, a lot of lives lost, so that we could vote for our candidate for city council or county commissioner's court or constable or president of the United States of America. It's a special thing. It was purchased very dearly by very few for the very many. And that democracy at this moment is under attack. We might very well lose it. And I know politicians are given to histrionics and hot smoke and hot air and coming on too strong when they really care about something. But let me lay out the facts and then see if you disagree with me. You know this because I listened to you when I was in Rains County in 2017 and 2018. That we were already having a real hard time listening to one another, having conversations, and finding common ground between Republicans and Democrats, between rural Texas and urban Texas, between the East Coast of the United States and the Midwest of the United States. We were like different tribes, enemies in different camps, so we shared a nationality. We didn't seem to share a common cause. We couldn't find consensus. Compromise? That was a four-letter word in Washington, D.C., even in our state capitals, maybe even in this community right here. It's my way or the highway, and if you don't agree with me, well, you're not as American as I am. You're not as much of a man or a woman as I am. That's the way that a lot of people carry themselves in this country already. And then you have this, perhaps the most important election in the history of this country to decide the future of this country. It took place just last year in 2020. I can't think of one in my 49 years on this planet more hotly contested, where those battle lines were drawn, and they were drawn hard. You're with us or you're against us, people seem to be saying to one another, and even to people within their own families. And at the end of that election, the person who got fewer votes told everyone in this country that he actually got more votes. And it was confusing because, look, our presidents have never been perfect. And no, they have not always told us the truth. There's probably not a one of them who always has. No matter what they say about George Washington and the cherry tree. But this president, out of whole cloth.
You say Biden's telling the truth all the time?
No, I'm not, sir. And you know what?
No.
No, Cynthia, please, let me see him.
Republicans are lying. That election was stolen. We all know it.
And sir, it's okay. Listen. Speaking of democracy, we got to make this work. This gentleman would like to have his say, and I want you to. And here's my promise to you. If you will allow me to say my piece, you will be the first person to whom I turn the microphone.
Tell these people where your generations come from. You're fourth generation Irish American.
Yes, sir.
All these people think you're from Mexico.
Not one does. Here you go. You would rather shout over us than have the microphone and talk with us. And that's okay. He's making a case. So, and by the way, I don't blame this guy, and I'm not going to judge or blame anyone who believes that Trump was a rightful winner of that election and that there was widespread fraud, because the point I was trying to make is that it's really hard for a lot of people to think that their president, who's in the highest position of public trust in the land, the most powerful position in the world, that he would lie to us in this way. I don't blame you. I don't blame anybody who believes that. Nonetheless, to make sure that we're all on the same page, and I'll just give you these facts. President Trump's Secretary of Homeland Security, that's the agency in charge of election security and making sure that our elections are free and fair, called the 2020 presidential election the safest and the most secure in American history. Now, I'll tell you what, just to make sure that we're all holding ourselves accountable. As you know, I ran for Senate in 2018, and I lost fair and square. I lost a close one. It's the closest Senate election in Texas since 1988. And man, on the day of that election, if you asked me, I would have sworn to you that we were going to win. It just felt like we were. We saw the numbers coming in, the crowds who were showing up. It felt like it was going to happen. But on election night, somebody from my team came to me and they said, look, we've run the numbers, and even though all the votes are not in, there is no way that you're going to win this. And Beto, I know this is hard for you to hear, but you need to know it. And you want to know what I did next? I called Senator Ted Cruz. And Senator Ted Cruz answered the phone, and I said, Senator Cruz, I want to congratulate you. You have won this election. You will be the next senator for the state of Texas. And I want you to be successful. And if I can ever be of any help to you, this is my cell phone number, please call on me. And Senator Cruz said, hey, Beto, it was a hard-fought race. You ran a great campaign. Thank you for the phone call. He gave his victory speech. I gave mine in defeat. That's what we have done for 245 years without accepting any dissent. That's how we do it. And these folks who have been led to believe something that's not true, something contrary to facts and to outcome, on the 6th of January, wittingly or not participating in what many are calling the big lie about election fraud in 2020, they stormed the United States Capitol. 5 people, including a police officer, were murdered in the process, and they carried political banners, read Donald Trump. They carried the Confederate battle flag into the citadel of our democracy. Ladies and gentlemen, it has been invaded once before successfully, and that was in 1812 by a foreign occupying army of the British. Since then, all of the years and centuries in between, we've been able to keep her safe, even in the midst of the Civil War. General Lee, try as he might, could not break through. But they did. And as you know, not only did they kill those 5 people and that police officer, they constructed a gallows in front of the Capitol where they promised to hang the then Vice President of the United States of America, Mike Pence. They sought to murder members of Congress, Republicans and Democrats, where they sat and where they worked. And thank God, but for those Capitol Police officers who are Republicans and Democrats alike, it doesn't matter. But for them, they really lost their lives.
Yeah, what about that lady that got shot by a cop?
That's right.
Yeah, nobody wants to tell that about who that cop was.
I'll tell you about her. She was trying to break into the Capitol and was shot. You're absolutely right. Sir, you don't have to yell. 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 So, you have the big lie, you have the insurrection attempt, and then I'm going to bring this home to Texas, and I'm going to turn this microphone over to you. In Texas, this is the toughest state. This is the toughest state in the country in which to cast a ballot. Now, some of you may say, look, I vote every election without problem. And I'll tell you, I do too. And many Texans, millions of Texans are able to do this. But let me lay it out, just the facts, you draw your own conclusions, okay? Over the last 8 years, 750 polling places have been closed in the state of Texas. This is one of the fastest growing states in the union. We now total almost 30 million of us, 750 polling place closures. No other state in the union comes even close. And some of you know better than others, but the vast majority of those closures were in the fastest growing Black and Latino neighborhoods. So when you see video footage on election day from Houston, Texas, at Texas Southern University, one of the great historically Black colleges of America, and there's a line that stretches 6 hours long for people to vote, very often the news is, well, aren't these people amazing and courageous and patriotic for standing in that line? And they are all those things. But isn't it a national embarrassment and shame that we make somebody wait 6 hours just to cast their ballot? That's what we do in the state of Texas. In the state of Texas, this isn't me saying this is a 3-judge federal panel. So these are federal judges appointed by presidents of both parties. They call our congressional district boundaries, which, by the way, you and I have nothing to do with drawing. It's the members of Congress choosing their voters instead of the other way around. They call that in Texas a racial gerrymander. Now what does that mean? It means this, and the judges produced evidence to demonstrate that it's true. There's a good chance that if you are Black in the state of Texas, that you will be drawn out of one district where you might make the difference in election and drawn into another where you're packed with so many other Black voters that you won't. Or that you are cracked and put into a district with so many white voters that you may be the only Black voter among the only Black voters, so that your power as a community, as an interest group, is insignificant at the end of the day. It flies in the face of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. It is illegal on its face, and that 3-judge federal panel found it to be so. Last thing that I'll tell you about our laws as they exist today. Voter ID, and I saw a gentleman was handing out a page on voter ID, and sir, I want to make sure that you have a chance to talk as well, because you disagree with me, and our ability to do so civilly and agreeably, I hope, is what defines us from so much of the rest of the world. But on this voter ID thing, same deal. Common sense might tell many of us, look, I need a driver's license to open a checking account. I need an ID to do so many of the things that I do in the rest of my life. What's the big deal asking someone to present an ID to prove who they are when they want to vote? And I'll tell you, on its face, that's a very strong argument. When you look at the forms of ID that are accepted, that are legitimate in the state of Texas, when you go to vote, it just turns out that disproportionately, African Americans, the poor, the very young, and the very old happen not to have them. I'll give you an example. A gentleman reached out to me and he said, my mother is now 85 years old. She doesn't vote, so she doesn't need a driver's license. Yes, she could go down to the local state office and obtain some new kind of state-based ID, but she doesn't have a car. I can't take her because I don't live in the same town that she does. She's in an assisted living community, and so she is now disenfranchised from voting. Another young man with a significant disability, has cerebral palsy, says, I haven't been able to get an ID because I can't drive. I haven't been able to get a state-issued ID that's not a driver's license because I cannot produce a utility bill because I don't pay the utility bill at the assisted living center where I live. And so I'm not able to produce what will prove who I am when I try to vote. Students cannot use their student ID at any institution of higher learning, any community college, any four-year university, any graduate school to prove who they are. But for as long in Texas as we still need a license to carry a firearm, you can use that to prove who you are at the ballot box. So when you look at the outcome, the effect, whether or not it was intended, and let's just hope that the intentions were positive and benign in terms of setting these voter ID laws. Whatever the intent, the outcome was not. That's how you get to 50th out of 50 in terms of ease of voting and voter registration. On top of all that, this last year, the Texas legislature proposed the most restrictive voter suppression bill in the United States of America. And some people love that. Some people don't. And I'll tell you why you might not. So let's talk about veterans. Forever in Texas, if you had a disability and you wanted to vote an absentee ballot, you wanted to vote early because your disability does not allow you to go and vote in person. Let's say you came back from Vietnam with post-traumatic stress disorder, and for whatever reason, that doesn't allow you to be around people. You feel very uncomfortable, you get anxious, you don't want to you want to vote by mail. Before this year, you could, no question asked. You request that absentee ballot, you say you have a disability, we take your word for it. Let's say you have a job at the bank, and you also happen to have clinical depression, and you don't want the folks at the bank or anyone else to know that. Under the new Texas law, you would have to disclose personal, private, privileged medical information. That veteran will no longer take his word about his PTSD. He's going to have to prove that he has PTSD before he can pull that absentee ballot. That banker with clinical depression, the same. That young man with cerebral palsy that I talked about, get a note from your doctor before we will allow you to vote. This is an attack on millions of our fellow Texans who are walking around every day living with disabilities that they'd rather not disclose. And I don't think we should make them do that. Another provision, they're going to end Sunday morning voting. If you're like me, you sleep in on Sunday morning, no skin off your back. But others, especially in the African American community, will use a program called Souls to the Polls, where after their congregation meets in church, they walk over to the polling place, they drive over to the polling place, they take the bus over to the polling place, and they vote together. It's a time-honored, cherished tradition in Texas, and it is absolutely targeted at a unique population, African Americans in the state of Texas. That's in the new voter suppression bill here. They would allow partisan poll watchers, they can be Democrats, they can be Republicans, to intimidate and harass voters in the polling place. Unfortunately, in Texas, this state that had the poll tax, the literacy test, the all-white Democratic primary in the 1920s, there is a long history of intimidation by poll watchers in the polling place. That's coming back if this voter suppression bill passes. And the last one, because I've laid a lot on you, the last one. This bill is called SB 7. It would allow the state of Texas to overturn a lawful, legitimate, small d, democratically decided election based on the allegation of fraud. Now that worries me, because whether the person who won was a Republican or a Democrat, if you're the voter who voted for them, knowing that that vote can be overturned because fraud was alleged, just as fraud was alleged in Pennsylvania and Georgia and Arizona in 2020, the states that provided the margin to the president, the rule of law, again, something that sets us apart from the rest of the world. The rule of law, not the rule of man, not the rule of woman, not the rule of a political party, the rule of law. The rule of law prevented that election from being overturned. Despite the coup attempt, despite the insurrection, despite the votes of members of Congress who tried to overturn it, the rule of law prevailed. Well, if this bill passes in Texas, the law will be the elections can be overturned going forward. I think that should worry all of us. That bill, with all of these provisions in it, that bill, despite Democrats being in the minority in the state house, was defeated by those Democrats in the state house who walked out and majority. It's an extraordinary step But extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures like this one. What I feel that those State House Democrats did is they purchased us some time, because there will be a special session. There'll be another voter suppression bill just as bad or worse than the one that I just described, making it even harder on millions of our fellow Texans to cast their ballot. And so before that session is called, we have to be called to service and to action. We've got to make sure that we step up and stand up for this democracy. Again, not for Democrats, I want to be clear, and not for Republicans, but for America, for rule of law, and for democracy. These are the steps that I think that we can take together. The first, you're a Texan, I'm a Texan. You're a voter, I'm a voter. You're a citizen, I'm a citizen. Call your state representative and state senator and let them know how you feel. And you don't have to use talking points from me or anyone. Use your own language. Speak from your heart. Tell them what you'd like to see in our elections law. Read the law for yourself. Read articles about the law so that you have a grounding on it. But if we are truly government of, by, and for the people, then you're the government, I'm the government. And those who represent us in the government need to listen to the people of the government. So that's the first thing, is to reach out to your state rep. Let them know how you feel, your state senator. Second, there is a very important piece of federal legislation that is pending right now in the United States Senate, and is called the For the People Act. The For the People Act. Some of you have heard it, and I love that. It's rare in the course of human history that a Senate bill will get a round of applause. That shows you how important this bill is. It's already passed the House of Representatives. The President of the United States has already said he will sign it into law. It is just pending some political will in the United States Senate to get it across the line. Now, those of you who've been reading about an intransigent senator from the state of West Virginia might think that this bill does not have a snowball's chance on a hot afternoon in Emory, Texas. I'm here to tell you that it does. And I'm here to tell you because there was a similar situation this country faced not too long ago, in the lifetime of many who are here, just before mine, and we came through. 1964, Dr. King, Ambassador Andrew Young go to meet with President Lyndon Baines Johnson, our fellow Texan. And they say, Mr. President, in Texas, in Georgia, in Mississippi, in the states of the former Confederacy, for men like us, for women who are black, for those who do not look like the majority in this country, it is very hard, if not impossible, to vote. That poll tax, that literacy test, that how many jelly beans are in the jar before I allow you to register to vote, that applies only to people who look like us. There are counties in Mississippi where 90% of the population is African American, and there's not a single black voter on the rolls. Mr. President, how can you call this a democracy? This isn't a democracy yet. And Johnson says to them, according to Ambassador Young, who told the story afterwards, you're right, I'd love to help you, but there's no way that the Congress is going to vote to pass this. No way that those Southern senators and Southern members of Congress, though they be Democrats, back when they were Democrats in the South, they're not going to vote for this. And so I'm so sorry that I can't help you. Have a great day. As they're leaving the White House, a dejected Ambassador Young turns to Dr. King and says, Martin, what do we do now? And Dr. King responded, we go out there and we get the president some power. In other words, if the president says he doesn't have the power, we've got to go find that power for him. And over the course of the next year, they did. And that power looked like you and me and the people of the country who are willing to get out there and speak truth to the power that existed in representative office and demand that they take action to make sure that this democracy truly did represent and serve everyone, given the fact that everyone from every group, every population, every color, every country on the planet that has come here as immigrants has at one time or another served this country, especially in uniform. They took to the streets, they marched, they sat in, they registered voters, and on March 7th, 1965, a 24-year-old John Lewis attempted to march from Selma, Alabama to Montgomery to demand voting rights, to demand a democracy in this country of his, of ours. And as you all know, before he could make his way across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, he was beat. He was beat within an inch of his life, as were other marchers, peaceful, nonviolent marchers on that day. It's 8 days later that LBJ convenes a joint session of Congress, the 15th of March, 1965. And he begins that speech by talking about Selma. And he says, what just happened in Selma should give us no pride, and in fact should compel us to act. They're simply marching for the right to vote. You, ladies and gentlemen of the Senate and the House of Representatives, have the power to confer it. And over the course of that speech, he compels them to do just that. Later that year, the 1965 Voting Rights Act would pass both houses of Congress and be signed into law by President Johnson. John Lewis, Dr. King, Andrew Young, Fannie Lou Hamer, millions of Americans gave the president the power. That's where we are with Joe Biden right now. He might tell us if he were here with the other microphone right here in Rains County, look, that's a great idea, I love it, I'm all for democracy, but I'm never gonna get that sucker passed. So, nice try, let's go focus on infrastructure. We've got to give the president the power. And I think the power is reaching out to the White House, or if anyone in Rains County wants to organize a march or a protest and be seen, when those pictures get beamed back to Washington, D.C., and they say, hey, is this a march in Austin, Texas? Is it in Dallas? Is it in Houston? Is it in a big city? No, it's in Rains County. And the president says, where's Rains County? It's northeast of Dallas. It's the third smallest county in the state of Texas, and people in Rains County, fourth smallest county in the state of Texas, people in Rains County, no matter how big or small, care about democracy that much that they were willing to get out there on that hot afternoon and march for it. Mr. President, I think you need to see this picture. It's starting to happen all over the state of Texas. Texas is ground zero in this fight for voting rights, and those Texans, they're doing all that they can, but they need some help from you. You got to use that muscle, that political power, that capital that you have stored, and you got to burn it for this, for democracy, for voting rights. So, whatever form it takes, and I'd say call the switchboard at the White House. I'd say march in the streets and send those pictures to your friends all over the country. Let's make sure that they hear us and they see us. That's action step number 2. Third and last. Lauren and I and Cynthia have all become volunteer deputy registrars, VDRs. That just means that we are street legal in Emory to register folks to vote. I can knock on your door. If you're unregistered, I can register you right there on the spot. I can turn that in at the elections department, and you're good to go for the next election. Easy as that. I've gotten sworn in to do this in Cook County, in Dallas County, in Denton County, in Midland County, Lubbock County, Webb County, and El Paso County, and I'm probably leaving out 1 or 2. The thing is, I'm going to try to do this in as many counties as I can. I only have 245 to go to get to all of them, and sooner or later I will. But we'll get there. I see this as our insurance policy. Let's just say we can't stop voter suppression in Texas. This bill is going to come down the pike in the next special session. Let's just say that President Biden does not hear our plea, or does and isn't able to get it through. In the 2020 election, 7 million of our fellow Texans did not vote. Most important election in human history, and they didn't participate. Now, they may not have liked the candidates, that's certainly possible. They just may not like politics. I heard from a woman in Emory today who had tried to register to vote who said, I just don't get involved in politics. No, thank you. It may have been for some other reason, like the obstacles that I just described are in their way, but there were 2 million of them who weren't even registered to vote to begin with, though they were age eligible. If you become a VDR, do what I did today. It took me 5 minutes at the county annex at the elections department. 5 minutes to get signed up, then your sister-in-law, your son, your neighbor, the person you run into in the grocery store. For the single men and ladies here, it's a great excuse to talk to an attractive stranger, ask them if they're registered to vote, strike up a conversation, see where that goes. But it's also a great way to make sure that no matter how rigged the system is, no matter how tilted the playing field, that we can bring enough numbers, enough voters, enough people, enough Texans to bear to prove this out at the end. That's the third action step that we can take. And just to, let's give a round of applause to registering people to vote. You know that woman that I mentioned, she was the first. There's a training you have to do. First time that that's right. So I'm getting certified in different counties after having been trained in my home county. So it was 5 minutes for me. If you do it here, it's going to be 15 minutes maybe, or 20 minutes if it's the first time you've done it, because you go through a quick training and you have to take a test. It's not a hard one, I promise you, to prove that you read the material, but then you're good to go. So thank you for keeping me honest on that. The first door I knocked on, woman answered. I already told you her story. She said, I'm not interested in that politics, and thank you very much. And I said, I hear you. Let me just give you one of these mail-in voter registration forms. So at your convenience, should you choose that you want to register, fill this out. You don't need to attach a stamp. Postage is paid. Send it in the mail. She said, thank you very much. I said, well, look, as long as we're talking and I'm at your door, can you tell me what matters to you? If you could change one thing here in Rains County, in the state of Texas, in the country, what would you change?
Yes.
And she said, no, she said, she thought about it for a while, and she said, I'll tell you what I would change. I don't like the fact that someone can work a full-time job and still not have enough to make ends meet. She said, I have people in my life who work their hearts out, and with a minimum wage at $7.25 an hour, they cannot cover rent, they cannot cover gas, they cannot cover food. They go into debt, and the next month a little bit more debt, and the next month a little bit more. And if they don't have friends or family that they can rely upon, they're bankrupt. They may be homeless. That's not right. And of course, I pitched her on voting. I said, that's one of those things that we decide at elections. Who's the candidate that wants to raise the minimum wage? Who's the candidate that wants to fight to make sure that you work all day and you have enough to pay the rent and then something left over at the end of the day to spend on the weekend? So that was a good conversation. My other one, and this wasn't necessarily, to put it in baseball terms, I really ended up 0 for 2. The second one, a gentleman said, I tried to vote, and I've tried to register to vote. They won't let me vote because I have a felony. And I said, well, in the state of Texas, if you have a felony, you've served your time, you paid your fines, and you're not on parole or probation, then you can get that right to vote back. And he said, you know what, I want to vote for Donald Trump in the next election. And of course, some part of me said, well, now's where I turn around and walk away and I just figure this out on its own. But I didn't do that because if we really believe in this, then we really believe in this. And so I took the gentleman's name down. I asked him for a phone number, does not have a phone in the house, does not have a cell phone. But I took his street number down, and when I visit the voter registrar in Rains County tomorrow, I'm going to say, there's a gentleman that I met who would like to vote, has tried several times, has satisfied the conditions of his crime, his felony, and the law says he should be able to vote. And I want to make sure that we're doing this for Republicans and Democrats alike, so can we help him out? Let's see what happens. So I didn't get a chance to register anyone today, much less a Democrat today. But it did feel good to be knocking on those doors, to be talking to people, and to be walking this walk with you. I think if enough of us do this, and if we try hard enough, if we do those things I just described, and maybe some that you're going to suggest to me, then maybe, just maybe, we meet this moment and the threat that this democracy faces, whether it's political violence, whether it's big lies told in the highest positions of public trust, whether it's voter suppression bills in Texas and 46 other state legislatures that are considering similar proposals. We, who Abraham Lincoln called the last best hope of earth, representative democracy, we might just have a chance to pull this off. And if we do, we could not be in finer company. So thank you for being here tonight. Very grateful to you. We've got another microphone, and we're going to share this one. Thank you all for coming out. We want to thank you. Please, thank you. Well, thank you. I'm very grateful. I'm grateful to you. Please take your seats. I want to, for those of you who would like to, I'd love to bring you into the conversation. And I promise some folks who might disagree with us that I give them the mic. All I ask is that we be respectful to one another. We should hear each other out. we should hear each other out. And maybe there's something I'm missing that you see that I should understand. And I'm very open to that. Let's try to find some common ground. We may not agree on everything, but maybe we'll agree on a few things. So Cynthia Connell, who's here in this Powered by People t-shirt, if you'll catch her attention, she'll bring you the microphone. We'll all hear you out, and then I'll respond if you want me to. If not, we'll go on to the next person. But I gotta tell you, before we do that, I did not expect this many people to come out in Rains County tonight. So this is really good. Thank you. Awesome. Okay,
Now is the question and answer time. Let's just give everybody a turn.
Hello, thank you, Beto, for giving us an opportunity to ask our question. I was really afraid that you wouldn't call on me because clearly I'm on the track.
That's all right.
My name is Christy Ratliff. I'm the DOP chair for Rains County. And so I have a two-part question for you. I have here a list of 24 different things. These are everyday, normal things that most people experience at some point in their life. Applying for food stamps, getting on an airplane, purchasing a gun, renting a hotel, visiting a casino, buying a cell phone, cashing a check. Visitors to any federal building have to show an ID. All of these things, people have to show an ID to do these things. And I hear you complaining or protesting against disenfranchisement, where you think that people are not being allowed to vote because they don't have a valid ID. But I don't hear you arguing or protesting against any of these rules. So that's my first question. Why are you not protesting against these rules? My second question is, if you really want to help people and not just make it easier to cheat when you vote, I really want to help people.
It's okay. Let's let her talk.
Then why aren't you making it easier for people to get a photo ID so they can not only vote freely, but they can also do all of these things that they currently cannot do?
That's great.
So, first of all, Chairman Ratliff, I'm so glad that you're here, and you've proved that this still works, right? That we don't have to be so divided that we can't even talk to one another, or be in each other's presence, or hear each other out. I actually think, and you correct me if I'm wrong, that we might be on some common ground here. I don't disagree that someone should present some kind of identification to vote. And I'm, there's some states that there are some states that don't do that. I think Montana, a very fairly red state, doesn't require any ID, may not even require voter registration to begin with. Some states do, ours does. What if we expanded the list of photo ID to include a student ID? Because young people are disproportionately impacted by this photo ID requirement. That might be something you could agree with, because I heard you say, what if we make it easier for people to get a photo ID? I like that idea a lot, and it would allow them to do everything else on that list, flying on airplanes, going to casinos. So I like that. I think you want to be on the same page there. And I heard, I think, in your question and in your statement, that you want to make sure that we protect the integrity and the security and the safety of the ballot box. I think all of us do. And I mentioned that earlier. I don't want to see elections tampered with or spoiled in any way, and I don't even want to question the outcome of anything. Having run, and you ran as well in some capacity to be the chair. So what if we make it easier for those who are eligible to vote to do so? I mentioned the other barriers, the gerrymander. You probably don't like that any more than I like it, because Democrats do it as well as Republicans. Democrats choose their own voters just like Republicans choose their own voters. That For the People Act that I mentioned that's in the Senate, it would set up an independent, nonpartisan redistricting commission. And that means that the Ted Cruz's and Beto O'Rourke's and Greg Abbott's and the politicians are not allowed in the room. They cannot choose their voters anymore. You just have it drawn along sensible, geographic, compact lines so that the folks in this region know that they're represented. They're not gerrymandered or hooked into another region with whom they have nothing in common. I hope they're doing that. So I know we want to agree on everything, and that's part of the beauty of our system. We need to have debate, and there needs to be contrasting visions and ideas for how we solve this country's problems. That, again, I think helps to make this great. But I would like to see expansion of the kinds of ID. I would like to find a way to make it easier for those who are eligible to vote to prove their identity and be able to cast that ballot. And then may the best woman, may the best man win, be they Republican or Democrat. So thank you for being with us tonight. Appreciate it.
I just have a comment for you. You say you don't want the election stolen. We went and voted in primaries this year. The head of the, can you hear me now?
Yes.
The head of the Republicans tried to get my husband to change from voting Democrat to Republican so he could vote for a different, who was it, the sheriff. Trying to get him to switch from voting Democrat to Republican just to vote for that. So how is that different from you talking about stealing elections? Because it didn't just happen in Van Zandt County, it happened in other counties as well.
Also, you mentioned not Ryan County. Really not.
Okay, we're gonna go to people that are waiting to turn. Who's
I'll tell
next?
you what.
Okay, you're not waiting nicely.
Real difficult. What do you do about this? You keep telling me that, I don't hear it.
What are we gonna do about Mitch McConnell? He won't let anything come to vote in the Senate.
That's right. I've got an idea on that one. So, you all know, the question was, what are we gonna do about Mitch McConnell? He's a Senate minority leader. He's in a political minority in a 100-person institution that, for some reason, requires 60 votes, not 51, but 60 votes to get anything of any significance done or passed. And these are the things that affect us in our lives. I mean, the quality of the roads that we drove in on to get here. You want to pass an infrastructure bill, it might take you 60 votes to do it. And these democracy reforms, whether it's ending gerrymandering or getting corporate dollars out of our politics so that our politicians listen to people instead of the profit margins of the energy and electricity companies that led to that 700 death winter storm in February. Whatever it is, you need to be able to pass it along a simple majority, or else it's just frustrated and gummed up, and it's another way in which democracy dies. People say, just like that woman earlier today, you know what? This stuff doesn't work. Biden campaigned on this or that, the Democrats campaigned on this or that, they all got into power, and they couldn't do anything. And then there'll be a Republican president, and a Republican Senate, and a Republican House, and that Republican president campaigned on all this stuff, and they have majorities, but they can't get anything done. To hell with this. I'm gonna stop voting. I'm open to another form of government altogether. That's how you descend into a tyranny or something else. Like, just to hell with these jokers. Give me a strong man who's gonna make the trains run on time. That's what Mitch McConnell is gonna do to us if we let him. So this filibuster, you will find it nowhere in the United States Constitution that those of you who serve this country swore to defend. There's no filibuster mentioned there. Filibuster is what requires 60 votes instead of 51 votes, and what is preventing anything from getting passed. We've changed the rules of the filibuster to allow federal judges to be, once they're nominated, confirmed on a 51 vote majority. We've allowed Supreme Court judges to pass on a simple majority. I think it's time that we do the country's business on a simple majority. If there are 51 votes in the Senate, then let's get it done. And I recognize that what's good for the Democrat is going to be good for the Republican. And when Republicans are in power, they will be able to pass along a simple 51 vote threshold. But hear me out on this. Given all the ink spilled and all of the talk that we've had around ending the filibuster, you know as well as I, at some point that's going to happen. And so the question is it going to be on our watch, those of us who care about democracy and want to see voting rights passed? Or is it going to be on the watch of Mitch McConnell when he's possibly in the majority, and when you have state constitutions and state laws across the country that allow those legislatures to overturn elections? You may not get this democracy back. So the filibuster, ending the filibuster, and I think you got almost every one of those 51 votes for at least reforming the filibuster, except one. And that's a gentleman from West Virginia, maybe two, the gentlelady from Arizona. That's where the president comes in. We really need him to make this priority number one. If he does, I'm confident that we at least have a shot. If he doesn't, there is no chance. And that's how we beat Mitch McConnell. Thanks for asking the question.
You know what? If you Democrats did not use that filibuster when Trump was in office, you're never going to give me that mouth. And I want to tell you, if you cannot,
this, buddy. Just
no,
play by the rules.
you lied to
Rule of
me
law, my
long
friend.
enough.
Rule of law. Play by the
You
rules,
cannot
and I'm happy to
change
hand you the
your
microphone.
vote
I'm happy to hand you the microphone.
without a birth certificate.
I get my first question.
Tell me about that. I did one.
Listen, the tone kind of changed for me for some reason because when you first showed up, you were using the term oppression. It sounds like to me something that I'm trying to make you happen to you, which that by all means is not the case. But everything in our life has checks and balances. And if you've ever, I'm sure everybody here has ID. Does anybody here not have ID? So when you bring hearsay to our little county, it does not apply to us. And besides that, a lot of the Democrats, there's 6 African Americans here, they knew you were going to be here, and I know they all got IDs. So it's not just
We're
voting
people that don't.
It's not
You're
saying-
for the people that don't.
Sir?
You're for the people that don't. Okay?
Okay, but do they not have transportation like I do? I mean, I have PTSD too, but I'm here to listen to y'all and try to be reasonable and not just
Sir,
go like.
I served my country for 20 years.
Sir, I did too.
Air Force, and
I did too.
do it for red.
I respect
but I
what you did.
respect people's right.
Okay, I have the question, so please respect me, okay? I appreciate your service. My question is you're talking about what the Republicans are presenting, but what are you actually presenting? I mean, that's all it requires these days is a thumbprint. That's who you are. And it's only the thing is, it's not by who is frauding or all that. It is by fraud, because it does happen. I mean, you're an example of it. So when you're trying to come up with oppression laws, I mean, you're not going about it the right way, but you're able to call it oppression. Instead of saying, hey, all we need is a thumbprint, because you're given a birth certificate when you're born. That's who you are. And in order to prevent anything from both the Democratic and Republican Party, y'all need to get together and present laws that will make it easier for the African American people to vote that don't have IDs, like the way that you have. Instead of saying, like, all the hate that we have in this country by labeling me as an oppressor. I'm not an oppressor.
And I didn't say you were.
But did you even know where the African American community is in Reeves County?
I don't.
Okay. All right.
I'm not as familiar with Green County as you are. But listen.
But I understand what you're saying about them. They have a hard time getting here, but I understand that part too. But that's not my responsibility or my fault as a Republican, correct?
One thing.
If you're American, but I support your vote. I support your vote. I'm American. I support. That's your constitutional right. That's what you're up here to do is a constitutional right. And that's what I took an oath to.
That's right. You got it. I hear you. Listen, I call me
An eternal optimist, but I'm seeing lots of common ground here. You just said, whether it's a thumbprint or something else, let's find a way to make it easier for those who don't currently have ID, who are eligible to vote, and by law should vote. Let's make it easier for them to vote. I like that a lot. I don't know if that is the solution. I don't know if there's another solution, but the fact that you're trying to find that. So I want to be very clear because you said that I was accusing you of voter suppression. I'm not. I'm not doing that. In fact, you just demonstrated that you're trying to find a way to make this work, and I think that's wonderful. And you're trying to find some common ground. So thank you for that. Appreciate it.
I would like to explain something because I've been on total disability since I've been 38. I worked since I'm 13. Nobody can help them they become disabled. But let me tell you what did happen. Is I had to go get a driver's license because someone stole my purse. I'm on total disability. I'm not making a whole lot of money. It cost, because I was born in Pennsylvania, it cost $125 to get that license. I'm telling you, that's what it cost. I had to come in with all the paperwork. And it is not an easy thing to do. And I don't drive, I have epilepsy, I have MS, I have other things, which at this point everybody's had cancer. But you know, the point is where does that $125 go from? And you know, no, I don't have transportation. And if someone had brought me here, I couldn't have been here. And I can't go to 20 miles. I'm just lucky things are by mail and that Amazon exists and you can go online now. But that didn't used to be. I used to sit in a room because I didn't have any transportation. I couldn't stand at a bus stop. Somewhere there has to be the ability to vote.
My mom is 86, and her license expired while the pandemic was going on and the offices were closed. She couldn't get it redone, but that was okay because they had a moratorium on that anyway. So we set it up, and it just so happened that her appointment happened when we had that freeze. And of course, they closed the offices, and she couldn't get it.
Can you hold the mic a little closer to your mouth?
Sorry, okay. So she couldn't get it then. And now the wait times are months and months and months unless you really go and sit. And she can't do that because she has disabilities that keep her from being able to do that. So when the license is required as a requisite to vote, mom can't vote. And she's got to risk an election, at least for president.
Thank you for sharing that. That helps us understand what people are going through.
I'm almost 70, July 4th, I'll be 70. There is a law, if you're over 70 or over, you don't have to have a current driver's license. It can be more than, however many years, as long as it's still valid, it doesn't have to be current. So, you should still use it. That's the law.
I have long maintained part of our difficulty in this nation is we have become too extreme in both parties. So, as a contrast to the lady's explanation who spoke a few minutes ago, I want to tell you another little story about voter suppression. Not oppression, but suppression. I decided I'm an independent voter. I've been an independent voter all my life. I will remain an independent voter. I will vote for the most qualified candidate. I don't care about the party. I can remember the March on the Pettus Bridge. I was in Washington, D.C. in 1967 when a good part of Washington, D.C. was burned to the ground. So I'm not speaking about what I've heard about on the news. I'm speaking from my own experience. A few months ago, I decided to support Beto O'Rourke on his Senate run. I was so bold as a resident of Hunt County to put a campaign sign in my yard. I heard on social media a response to that act. I don't know who the individual was. They like to remain anonymous. But they said one good thing about Beto's running for Senate, we all know where the idiots live. Now, I graduated from Texas Tech. Some of you may know where that is in 1966. Then I was so insolent, I went back and graduated twice. I went back in 73 and got another degree. Well, when somebody calls me an idiot because I support Beto O'Rourke, where I come from, them fighting words. I have a message for some of my Republican neighbors, and they are my neighbors. The Confederates lost the Civil War in 1865. They were on the wrong side. I'm supporting an individual running for the 6th Congressional District who happens to be a neighbor and a friend of mine. His name is Doc Shelby. Doc? I support him because he's a man that takes County, in Rains County, in every county in Texas, and it's time the Democrats put a stop to it.
My name is Joe Perez. I'm a Hispanic. I'm retired from the military for 23 years. I've been in here 27 years. I've never had any problems. Nobody's ever put any questions to me. No ID card. And I vote. We've got other things that are more important. The gas, the price of gas, the groceries. Once it's gone up, the border, lumber. We've got all those issues, but we don't want to talk about those things because those are important, but they interfere with Democrats. They interfere with your agenda. So we avoid those things. They were talking to an individual at the border, one of the coyotes, and they asked him, what do you want to ask Mike? He said, put a bridge here for us. So it'll make it easier. I mean, this is where we're at. And the point is that we're ignoring what we really need, like what we had before. The taxes are going to go up. Everything is going up. And we can do something about that. We can do something about that. But we won't, because we're taking this in a different direction. And that's not the direction that people voted for. They thought Biden was going to be moderate. And now he isn't. Yes, he is. Because we closed a pipeline that was coming down, but we approved the Russian one going to Germany. If it was for the climate, then what's the difference?
The difference is that some people thought you didn't
And also, you know, the coal, they talk about coal is green thing, right?
Yeah.
But the Chinese are building I don't know how many plants, and they're using coal. And they're going to buy coal from us and from everybody else. But we don't say anything about that. We go into what there is. We go into that, but the Chinese, the Indians don't have to do anything. We surrender to the environmentalists, and this is where we're at right now. That's where the price of gas is at where it's at.
Thank you.
Good evening, Al. Good to see you here.
Good evening.
I want to say thanks for coming out to Rains County. As a voter, I have to go in there and show an ID. I have to go in there and show an ID to buy beer, cigarettes, or anything. I have no problem with that. And showing an ID in order to vote. Like my problem is that the state legislature is not doing what they said they were going to do when the voter ID bill went into effect. They're closing down more and more of the local offices. So I want more and more people to vote that can legally cast a ballot, win the election based on the merits of your policy, how they're going to benefit, reach to someone, whether you agree or disagree. They all wake up as Americans first, and the sacrifice of our military personnel shouldn't be diminished. I think someone might say, well, I'm a Republican or I'm a Democrat. Well, they put their lives on the line and things like that. So thank you to all the veterans that serve. Thank you to everyone coming in here to go in here and exercise democracy. We have commissioners' court meetings the second and fourth Thursday of the month. We've got room for over 200 people to come up. You got a problem with local government, come bring your ideas and solutions, and everybody listens. And again, thank you. Just a great thing, but I have no problem showing an idea because I have to do it on so many things. But let's expect our state leadership to go in there and fulfill the obligations that they make to people, make it easier for people to go in there and
Republican, there's going to be lots of changes with the deal carry, lots of security. Those are now really in the constitutional carry than other policies might be for being valid.
Thank you very much for being here.
Sir, my name is Doc Shelby, and I love Bobby. He's strong, and just like you. In order to come to a place where you're not looking and where you're going to catch all kinds of haters, but you're strong. Thank you for being strong. I'm going to be running for the court in the month of July is going to be very busy for us. And if anything that me and my team can do for you, you let us know, okay?
I will.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. O'Rourke, I thank you so much for coming into Rains County. I think this might be one of the few times we've actually had somebody who's going to run for the U.S. Senate to be here. So I appreciate it, and I was going to say I traveled to El Paso for work for many times. I was so, you know Roberto Canales, Dr. Canales?
Where would I know you from?
He's the head director there of the pediatrics program at Providence.
Okay, great. Yeah, I don't know him.
Anyway, great man. I just didn't know if you knew him. So I guess I listened, and I was going to say, I know that we're probably going to not agree on a whole lot of things, but I guess my question to you would be if you went through history like great. I mean, went through the 1920s, 1960s, probably hit some 1970s in there. I'm curious about now. I try not to live in the past. I mean, we learn from the past, but I don't try to live it. And so we've had the blacks and the Hispanic vote, the Latino vote, in the United States from 2016 to 2020 increased by millions, okay? And I think that that's a fact that doesn't get out very much. And I was going to say, so I guess I'm curious. I want everybody to vote that can vote. And I want there to be fair elections. I don't want to have to question this. It's silly what we're doing right now. But I will tell you, as I say, I appreciate you coming out here and taking the heat on these questions because, like I said, we wanted to hear what you had to say because we don't see a whole lot of voter suppression here in Rains County. Now, that's not Texas, that's not the United States, but here in Rains County, and we will try everything we can. I actually am a registered voter as well. And so we will do everything we can to get everyone registered to vote.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
You and I are in we're in a very elite club. There are only 5 volunteer deputy registrars in Rains County. I was number 5th today. So it's you and me and Lauren and Cynthia, and who's the one other in all of Rains County? Meaning, what's that? Patty Putnam? Okay, great. That's the 5 of us. So in other words, we could use a lot more volunteer deputy registrars and register Republicans to vote, register Democrats, register independents, as the gentleman said. He picks the person, not the party. I think that's the way that we should do it. And I appreciate what you said. I would just add, you're right. As we see the Latino population grow in Texas, we see their share of the vote totals grow in Texas. I think that's great. If you look at, you said to look at the present instead of thinking about the past, certainly African Americans are able to vote at a much higher level today than they were in 1964. But as we all learned growing up, if you do not know your history, do not learn from the past, you might just very well repeat it. And when you see these voter protections being rolled back, that were enshrined in law from 1965 until 2013, when the Supreme Court Shelby decision struck down Section 4 of the Voting Rights Law, you then saw the raft of voter suppression measures across the country and across the Deep South. I mean, ponder this one. Georgia, with a growing African American electorate, gave their electoral college votes to the Democratic nominee in 2020 for the first time in 30 years. The next month, or 2 months later in January, they elected 2 Democrats, including Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff. Historic elections. Immediately on the heels of those elections, Georgia state legislators introduced some of the most restrictive voting laws in the country. One of them is, if you happen to be one of those poor souls standing in a 6-hour line to vote, it is against the law to do what Lauren is doing right. You cannot offer somebody a bottle of water. Now, why is that? That just seems, Republicans and Democrats alike, I bet, will agree that that just seems mean. And I love what the woman just said right now. She wants to make sure everyone who's eligible to vote is able to vote. And I love what the commissioner said, that he hasn't had a problem having a vote in Reigns County. I think that's great for Reigns County. Let's make sure that is true for every county in Texas and every county in the state. The way we did it in 65, and that's why I told that long-winded story, and I apologize, but the way we did it in 1965 is we asked the federal government to intervene for one of the first times in American history in how we conduct our elections. And I just think it is high time that we ask the federal government to intervene again, only to ensure that we can do what you just said we should do. Every eligible voter able to cast their ballot. All right, Ms. Conlon. Hey, you're still here. Thank you.
All right, we have time for 3 last questions. Here we go.
Yeah, everybody. Everybody likes to know. He should get what I got to say.
What you said about the Georgia, that's not true. The only people that can hand out water in line are people that work for a political organization. Voter workers, regular people can hand out water, it's only if you're politically affiliated.
Thanks for sharing. I think we may have a different read on that one. Thank you.
All right, here's our 2 last questions right here. Nervous, but
You're good.
I met you like in 2018 in Springs, and I'm a teen mom. I just graduated early with my bachelor's in arts. Along with teen mom, I also do social media on the side. I have about 200,000 followers, and I talk about politics, music, anything that has to do with Mexican stuff or Hispanic stuff overall. You inspire me, and I ran for city council last year at the age of 20. I was the only woman, the only Mexican woman, the only one in their 20s and had just turned 20. And I lost. Me and second place were like maybe 100 votes like apart. First place beat us by like over 1,000 votes, so he was on a roll for sure. And I just want to ask you, like, what would you advise somebody that wants to get into politics? Because I want to get into politics, and I've already taken my LSAT because I'm like, I don't know if I want to take the route of going to become an immigration lawyer. That's always been my dream. I'm taking it one more time before I actually decide I'm just gonna, take a different route instead of going to law school. But what is your advice to somebody that wants to get into politics?
It sounds like you're already knee-deep in politics. You ran for city council. You're doing such wonderful things in your life. You have 200,000 people who are interested in what you have to say and what you have to share on social media. And I hope, by the way, that when you communicate with them going forward, you'll at least mention some of what we talked about today. I won't tell you what to say. Repeat what you like that you heard, or come up with what you feel, independent of any of us. But I hope we all agree. I think we do. From everyone, those who even disagree about the approach, that getting this democracy right is critically important, and that's something so special. We keep centering this conversation, as we should, on veterans and those who served and were willing to give their life for this democracy in this country. So I hope that you'll add that on your social media platforms. Here's what worked for me, and obviously not everything always did, or I would be speaking to you as your U.S. Senator right now. But when I ran for city council and happened to win, when I ran for the United States House of Representatives and won 3 times, here's what I did. I did this, but I did it one person at a time. I knocked on doors all day, every day. And if someone wanted to talk about the economy or healthcare or military service, I would listen to them. But the thing that got me in that first run for Congress was I kept meeting veterans who could not get into the VA. Veterans who came back from Vietnam with PTSD or traumatic brain injury or a traumatic amputation, missing some part of what they took over to Vietnam that did not come back with them from Vietnam, and couldn't get in and see someone who could help them. And what we know, unfortunately, is that in this country, at least then, we were losing 22 veterans a day by their own hand every day. And the single greatest cohort that we were losing was the Vietnam generation. And those guys and gals are my heroes because unlike the World War II generation, also our heroes, they came back to a country that didn't understand or appreciate their service. And in some cases, turned their backs and spit on them. And they only did what we asked them to do. And now I felt like we were turning our backs on them again. So it's not a sexy issue. It wouldn't grab the headlines. Nobody would find it in a poll. But all I did after meeting these veterans at their doors who told me their story was talk about how we need to turn around the VA in El Paso. I made that the lead campaign issue. And folks would take me aside and say, hey, Beto, you should be talking about this issue or that issue. This one's controversial. This one's exciting. I said, you know what? But this one's important. We're losing people on this one, and we got to save them. And so we won that election by speaking the truth. I got placed on the House Veterans Affairs Committee, was able to make my focus mental health care access. As Lauren might have shared, I offered a bill, and I co-sponsored it with the Republicans that I worked with in the House of Representatives to ensure that veterans who had an other than honorable discharge, who were denied mental health care service before, could get it going forward. And though I agree with the guy on almost nothing, we got Donald J. Trump to sign that bill into law. We began saving lives that we were otherwise losing. So I just tell you that story because it takes you from campaign to listening to turning what you hear into action and making a difference in people's lives. That's politics at its best. Politics is not the Democratic Party for me. Politics is not the Republican Party. Politics is service. What do we do when we have the chance to help others because we're in a position of public service? That's my point.
And here, last question right here.
Hey, wait a minute.
I'm gonna come talk to you afterwards.
No, you ain't gonna say nothing. I said you are. You're not your vibe.
Before I ask the question I have,
You don't worry about it.
you've been talking about how hard it is to get them to people in the polls. I seem to remember somebody coming up here with a truckload of water. I'm from Point. We were without water for a week. And I seem to remember somebody was up here with a truckload of water. That says something, I think, about politics and character. My question to you is this. I've been up here for two censuses, the one in 2000 and the one in 2010, and of course the one that was supposed to be last year. And in contrast to the first two, I never was sent a form or contacted by any census person. And that disturbed me because there hasn't been very much information in the media about the census last year. But I'm concerned, considering the gerrymander issue, about whether or not the census last year was as accurate as it could have been.
Great question.
I would not like my vote not to be counted because I wasn't censused.
That's right. That's right. Thanks for the question.
Questions about the census and did we get an accurate count in 2020? We had a lot running against us, including the deadliest pandemic since 1918. And it unfortunately took the lives of more than 50,000 of our fellow Texans, more than 550,000 of our fellow Americans, and it significantly complicated efforts. And the danger of not being counted, of course, is the federal spending that follows the census count. What do we get for our schools? What do we get for our roads? What do we get for housing in Rains County? What do we get for those things we paid our federal taxes to get back in federal government services? How does that get apportioned if you didn't count all the people? You mentioned districting. We redistrict after every census year. The Texas legislature will do that a little bit later in 2021, but they do that based on the count that was conducted last year. And if you were not counted, and I hope they found you in some other way that you were unaware of, and I'm sure they have the means to do that, but if you were not counted and you live here in Rains, you know, the Rains loses out in the apportionment decisions that are made as they draw the new congressional boundaries, the new state district boundaries, whether it's state senate or state house. So whether it's funding and equity, whether it's political representation, this is pretty important. And I wish, I think I just told you absolutely nothing that you already didn't know. I wish I had a better answer. I wish I could say, you know what, don't worry, they got it covered. I'm a little concerned as well, to be honest with you. We had a census taker at our door, and we answered all the questions, and we're really pleased with the exchange until we learned that she thought she was at the door next door from us, and we were being counted in the wrong household. So I hope that was just one minor glitch, but it's important, and it gets back to democracy. That is, by the way, in the Constitution. Filibuster is not, the census is, and we want to make sure that Constitution is followed closely. So thank you for asking. I want to thank you all for taking the time and taking a chance to be with us on this evening. It turned out to be a beautiful evening, a wonderful conversation, even with, and maybe especially with those with whom we might disagree, to find out that we can still pull this off in this democracy. Thank you for being here, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for having us out here. Yes, let me turn it over to the chairman.
Thank you so very much. There's a lot of things I could say, but let me start off by saying that I've been here since the 70s, early. I've been here since we couldn't stand in line to be waited on. I was the one to stop that. I've been here in all of this. I've been here. Right now, we're being taxed out of our property in St. Flats. This time our property has went up almost double and almost triple. And if you understand this society, we don't have the money that you do, but they tax us like we do. It would take us 210 years to have the money that you have right now. But they tax us like we have your money. So we can't pay our taxes down land and get sold off either through the courts, or either we have to sell it in order to get what we can out of it and leave. So we're dwindling. Because
tax everybody.
We're asking that it's time for people to see what's going on with everybody, because we're all in this together. This is supposed to be the United States of America. And I went into Vietnam in the late 60s. I didn't go as a free person. I didn't have my rights. Still don't have them. I'm still waiting on with liberty and justice for all. You know what can give me that? You can. Start voting for me in mine.
Be quiet.
I'm standing here because I'm not attacked when we get to set my election. I don't have anyone to come in and fill all these polls most of the time. Everyone don't come in. So most people look like us are standing in those places. But I ask people to come on in and help.
I don't want to hurt.
This is
I'm talking about
this
spread.
So we ask that you would all take heed and participate in this democracy. When you vote for freedom and liberty and justice for everybody. Economic inequality. Economic inequality. Recently, they let out a little secret about the rich in this country, about how they're not paying their fair share of taxes. They're paying very little. They're paying less than a janitor. The wealthy people who are supposed to be paying taxes in America You remember when they started this tax situation, the wealthy were paying almost 90% of their taxes because they were taking it from the lower people and they had to pay it back, some of it to get back to where it needs to go. Everybody needs to pay their fair share. Everybody needs to pay their fair share. Now, stand up to everybody. See, I can't succeed unless you succeed. Now, this is another thing I ask you to do. If you see someone look like me in trouble, get in front of the people that's causing the job. The reason why I haven't been able to communicate with you this county is because one day I went over to the county to check on the article that I put in, and I asked about this George Floyd situation, and they asked them why they're not putting it. Are you going to put anything in the paper? I said no, and I said it's a simple thing. And they got angry. But the next thing I know, I went home and police was knocking at my door with something that said, if you come back up to this paper, we're going to put a felony on you. This is the kind of stuff I have to deal with. Walk around in my shoes, but you have to know what my shoes are walking in. I see you. You're human. We're all human beings. There's no such thing as races. We are all one race. It is the human race, and we're all in it. Yeah. We can't win unless we work together. Stand up for each other. Stand up for me like I stood up for you. This is what you stand for. My father fought in World War II. My father fought in World War II. And when they had the celebration about the Battle of the Bulge and that celebration, I was hoping to see some of us in that celebration, but there wasn't any. My father told me about those Pearl Hound pistols that Patton wore because he served with him. And I was looking in history books when I was young, and I saw none of us. We've been left out. Include us in. We are you and yours. I fought for you. It's time you fight for me. God bless you, Jesus, my prayer. God bless you, Jesus. You believe in Jesus.
Thank you all for being here tonight. Really appreciate it. Hope to see you all again soon. Have a great evening. Thank you so much.